Well, good afternoon, everyone. For those I've not had a chance to meet, my name is John Highbush. I have the honor of being the executive director of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute. Thank you all for joining us today. In honor of our men and women in uniform who defend and protect our freedoms around the world, if you please stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please be seated. Most of us who are interested in politics or history have times in our lives when a moment stands out as particularly memorable. While at work here at the Reagan Foundation, you can imagine that one runs into a lot of famous or important people, many of which are truly impressive human beings or historic figures in their own right. Time with them can often mean some indelible occasions, ones that even the cynics amongst us have to admit sometimes might take your breath away. Our special guest this morning, former governor, former presidential candidate Chris Christie, has created such moments for a lot of people, including me. Let me take you back to the month of September 2011 to set the stage. Chris Christie was here at the invitation of First Lady Nancy Reagan. A packed house. You may remember it was a special time for the newly minted governor of New Jersey. He had just felled a giant, John Corzine, in his move from U.S. attorney to the highest office in the state. Speculation was high that he might make a run for the presidency in 2012. Really high. Indeed, it seemed that the world beat a path to his doorstep, urging, even begging him to make a run. It was during this time frame that Governor Christie spoke here for the very first time. I remember introducing him quite well. My memory is clear on this because I was just one of many, many people who hoped at the time that he'd throw his hat in the ring. I genuinely admired him for his blunt outspokenness and all that he'd done to improve the lives of millions of people in New Jersey. So do many others. And here's the moment that I'll never forget. After he finished his formal remarks and near the end of answering questions from the audience, a woman in the balcony stood up. She was right there. She was a mother of several children. She didn't have a question. It was rather more of a plea. Please, she said, for the sake of her kids, for the sake of the country, Governor Christie, please run for president. There was a standing ovation. Then you could have heard a pin drop as he paused before he answered her. By this time, Governor Christie had publicly declined to run perhaps at least 1,000 times. But before he declined, for the 1,001st time, I remember turning toward him on the stage. I studied the look on his face. For just a second, it looked like he actually might reconsider and announce his candidacy right there on the spot. I was right next to him thinking, man, if he decides to change his mind and actually run, I am standing next to him in front of all these cameras, and I am going to make it on the evening news. Well, sadly, he didn't. Had he done so, I think there are odds he might well still be president today. While I didn't want to accept his good excuse, the fact that he'd sworn an oath of office to serve as governor for a full term, I had no choice, all of us had no choice, but to accept his characteristic commitment and duty to his state. So the rest is history, as they say. He went on to a landslide re-election as governor. He turned New Jersey's economy around. He became the chairman of the National Governors Association. By 2015, he did answer the call. He ran for president, but like so many other hugely talented candidates in the field, was the victim of the same old adage that often confronts all of us. Timing is everything in life, right? By then, his famous friend from the state next door, Donald Trump, had set his eyes on the White House and never looked back. Today, Chris Christie, private citizen, is here with his new book, the short title of which is Let Me Finish. It is a spellbinder, really worth a read, as it captures so many important moments in his life and even one in mine. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to the Reagan Library, Governor Chris Christie. Okay, first, I want you to either shoot down my premise or confirm I may have been right for just a millisecond, and that is that you reconsidered and almost made the run in 2012.
Well, you weren't the only one who thought it. I'll add to the story, because I did stand up and it was a long standing ovation, and it was, I have to tell you, given the scene where I was and how overwhelming the last week had been, which I chronicle in the book, there was another person who thought it, and that was my wife. And she was sitting right where you are, and Mrs. Reagan was sitting right next to her. And as the people were cheering and I was looking down at her, she was going, and Mrs. Reagan, seeing her do that, was patting her arm. And and so I restrained myself. As much about my civic responsibility to New Jersey, it was out of fear for what that 5-hour flight home would be like. As I was trying to explain to her, you don't understand. I mean, it's completely overwhelming, and why not? Let's do it. You know, I just, all that's going through my mind. So whatever you saw, John, it was a combination of both ambition and fear that was coursing through my body at the same time. And I was saying to John earlier that, you know, it was an extraordinary day in so many ways, because I had agreed to come here months before I actually did. And, you know, it was an amazing day sitting in the governor's office, and my assistant came in and she said, I don't think this is real, but you won't believe what you just got. And I said, what? And she put it in front of me. And it was a handwritten note from Nancy Reagan inviting me to come here and telling me how important it was to her that my voice be heard here and that she wanted to be here for it. And so she proposed that particular date. And my assistant said, so what do you want to do? I said, what do I want to do? Nancy Reagan's calling, man. You call back and say, yes, we will be there. And she was extraordinary that day. She had just recently had a fall, and so she was difficulty walking. But she wanted me to walk her in that walk that I just took. And I walked her in, and there were 3 things she said to me on that walk in, all of which were said by the wife of a politician who was a pretty good politician herself, and she wanted to get inside my head. So we're walking, and they made that announcement, as they just did for me and for John, but it took a long time for us to get in here because she was really walking slowly. And so first thing she says to me is we're walking in and people are cheering, and as you just were, she said to me, you know, Governor, this is the fastest sellout in the history of the Reagan Library. Did you know that? And I said, no, ma'am, I wasn't aware of that. She goes, oh, yes. We walked a little bit further, and she said to me, and do you know that this is the second largest number of media credentials that's ever been requested here, only behind President Bush 43 when he came here to speak? Did you know that? I said, no, ma'am, I didn't know that. She goes, yeah. And Marco Rubio had been here a bit earlier. And when he was walking Mrs. Reagan in here, that's when she fell. And so when I got her to her seat, she turned to me and she said, much better than Senator Rubio. So we had a wonderful day that day together, and we had a meal together afterwards. And the last thing I'll tell you about that day, which was still, it's in the book because it was a landmark day in my life and my career, to have come here to the Reagan Library for the first time, to see the library, and then to have the chance to speak here, and then to have all of the extra speculation and the rest that came along with it was just breathtaking. And we sat down for dinner, and when we finished, I went to get up to leave, and she put her hand on my hand, and she said, just a moment. And I said, okay. So I sat back down, and she looked at me, and she said, you know, Governor, she goes, sometimes God calls you when you least expect it.
Yeah.
And I looked at her, and I said, well, Mrs. Reagan, I appreciate that. God better get on the phone with Mrs. Christie fast. Who was not totally in favor of the idea at that time. So it was an amazing day, and Mary Pat sends her best to all of you. I was telling folks she had every intention of joining me. She was with me on the first part of our West Coast trip here, and then we have a 15-year-old daughter still, and she had a social studies emergency back at home where something got deleted off the computer, and as only 15-year-old girls can be, this was the crisis of her life. And so we were in Seattle at the time in connection with the book, and Mary Pat said, I really need to get on the plane and go back there and deal with her. She's melting down. I'm like, okay. So Mary Pat sends her best to all of you and intended to be here, but you should know, in case so you're not worried the rest of the weekend, the social studies crisis was dealt with. The report was handed in yesterday on time, and Bridget's march towards college continues unabated, so we're all doing well.
Great, thanks, Governor. I think you have this in the book. If not, I know I remember it. You were nicknamed kind of early on, you're like the YouTube governor. And I certainly remember why. I mean, it was so many clips of you in front of various audiences that have been captured on YouTube. And I wondered if the brief title of your book, Let Me Finish, is tied in any way to that time frame, the remarkable, the public nature of your commentary with unions and teachers and everything else. Does it stem from that, essentially?
It stems from a few things. When you run across a title that can apply to 3 or 4 different parts of your life, you kind of get drawn to that title. It initially started because reporters used to get very aggravated with me during press conferences when they would ask these long-winded, stilted, biased questions, and then I would actually like to take my time in answering them because I needed to deconstruct them and then reconstruct them and then give a logical answer to them. And invariably, they would attempt to interrupt me. And it became kind of legendary in the State House that I would, and I didn't know that I was doing this, but I would lock them with a certain look, a look that my children say they are also familiar with. And I would say, let me finish. So it started with that. We saw that in a whole bunch of YouTube clips as we were writing the book and said, well, that might be a good place to start. But then when you start to think about my life and my career, it does apply to the idea of the fact that I think there is still business that I have to finish. And so that's part of it. Part of it also applies directly to the stories in there about the Trump transition and the truncated nature of that and my involvement in it, and my plea to the president to let me finish. And so there's a whole bunch of ways as you read the book that you will see, let me finish courses through the book. And then in the epilogue at the end, I try to tie all of those different ways together for you. If you make it that far, we want it to pay off for you, and at least give you my point of view as to how all these different strands of my life tie into that title.
I always want to be curious. I've had the chance to read the book. I think it's been out 8-9 days, something. And spoiler alert, I don't want to give away too much of it because you really have to read this book. But there's a chapter in it that deals with, if you fast forward from 2011, 2012 to 2015, when you decided to make the run for president. And I believe it was at a debate or some such thing, and you turned to Mary Pat and you said, Mary Pat, we have a problem. And she said, well, what's that? And I'm going to let you finish the sentence, but it deals with the subject of jet fuel.
Yeah. It was after the first debate in Cleveland in August of 2015. And I had always operated under the premise from June of 15 to August of 15 that Donald Trump was going to drop out. I'd known him at that time for 13 years, and he had always kind of toyed with the idea of running for president, but never really did it. And he said he was in this time, but I knew him real well. He had never spoken to me about it before, and I really felt like, okay, he's going to get in, he's going to do one or two of these debates, he's going to experience it, and then he's going to go, oh yeah, okay, I'll go back to New York and not do it. So we get to the first debate, and if you recall the first debate, it started with a very contentious question from Megyn Kelly, right, to Donald Trump about him referring to women in a number of really disparaging ways, all of which were accurate, but were kind of startling to hear all grouped together, in one question. And at the first commercial break, you have to understand that Donald was not friends with anybody on that stage other than me. And that really, the rest of the folks on the stage really resented him, didn't like him. So during the breaks, like what the Republican Party should do if it really wants to raise money, is they should sell pay-per-view so you can live watch the commercial breaks. Because you can tell a lot about what's really going on in the race by who talks to who during the commercial breaks, who ignores who, who's bickering with who, who's going off to get more makeup. Like all that stuff is very, very telling. And during that first commercial break, I was talking to Jeb, and I got tapped on the shoulder, and I turned around, it was Donald. Well, as soon as it was Donald, Jeb walked away. And I said, yeah, what's up? And he goes, can you believe that question? Can you believe how incredibly unfair that question is? I mean, seriously. I mean, all right, so I said those things, but, I didn't say them all at once like that. And he's like, you know me. I mean, I wouldn't say stuff like that all together. And I said, well, you're in politics now. It's not fair. This is what it's going to be like. It's horribly unfair. And I said, Donald, I agree with you, but this is it. And he looks at me and goes, this business of yours, it's crazy. And he turns around and walks away. But I watched him the rest of the night in the debate. As the rest of the night went on, he was warming up more and warming up more and warming up more to it and getting more into the engaging of the back and forth and all the rest of it. And Mary Pat and I got on the elevator to leave after the debate was over. And I turned to her and I said, we have a problem. And she said, what's the problem? I said, he's not getting out. I said, and he's like me on jet fuel. I said, if he doesn't get out, there's no place for us to go. It's like he's a big 18-wheeler in front of me, and I'm on a 2-lane highway, and the traffic the other way just keeps coming, and I'm not gonna be able to pass him. This is gonna be a problem. And she said, he's getting out. And I said, yeah, you're probably right. But we knew very early that not only from a moment like that, but also we did polling. And, in this, New Year's Eve of 15, so we were, 30 days from the Iowa caucus and 38 days from the New Hampshire primary. I was in second place in New Hampshire. Behind Donald Trump, I was at 19%. He was at 30. And, but the next closest person behind me was at 12. So we had some real separation, and we were feeling pretty good about where we were. And I said, let's go a little deeper in the polling. And so we asked Trump voters, if Trump were to drop out of the race, who's your second choice? And I got 38% of those people, and the next closest person was Ted Cruz at 11. So, we said to each other, okay, well, if we can get him out, we're gonna win. And so we've got to just figure out how we're gonna get close enough to get one-on-one with him, and then we'll have a ball game here. And at that point, we had gotten the Union Leader endorsement, we had gotten the Boston Herald endorsement, so we were really gaining momentum. But it always was going to be a problem. The last anecdote I'll tell you about this is Mary Pat going door to door in New Hampshire, and she would come back and tell me these stories, and they were all roughly the same, where she would go to a door of a Republican household in Manchester or Nashua or any of the places around New Hampshire, and she would get a similar reaction. She'd go to the door and say, hi, I'm Mary Pat Christie, I'm married to Governor Christie. Oh, so nice to meet you. So the person, man or woman, would shake her hand and say, God, we love your husband. He is so smart and blunt and direct and honest. I mean, we're voting for Trump, but we love... we love your husband, and we hope Trump makes him vice president or attorney general. And Mary Pat would say, well, if you love Chris, why are you voting for Trump? And she said, one day this woman said to her, oh dear, we just don't need another politician. What I understood very early on in this race was that there were a couple of forces at work, and one of them was that the American people at that time in our history, and Hillary Clinton learned this soon after, if you had a title attached to your name, that was a disqualifier. What had always been a qualifier in American politics became a disqualifier. The other thing that was easy to recognize was that the rules did not apply to Donald. That all of the traditional rules did not apply to Donald. I'll tell you another story about this that I don't think I put in the book, which is the day that he said, John McCain is not a hero because he got captured. And I like people who don't get captured. Well, I had been in Iowa the day before. He did that in Iowa in a 2-day family values conference that they were doing in Iowa. And I'd been in Iowa the day before speaking, and I flew home. I'll never forget where we were. Mary Pat and I were in our kitchen, and I had it on the TV, and we were listening. And I had a double take. I'm like, did he just say McCain's not a hero? Really? I'm like, oh my God, that's a problem for him. He's gonna get killed here. You can't say that about John McCain. 6 years in the Hanoi Hilton. He's getting tortured. He passes up the ability to leave early because he says he won't leave before his men because he's the son of an admiral. He's not gonna take advantage of that, so he stays. Agree or disagree with John McCain on policy. I'm like, John McCain's a hero. You're not gonna be able to get away with this. He's gonna have to drop out of the race. Half an hour later, my phone rings. It's Jeb Bush. Jeb says to me, did you hear what Trump just said? And I said, yeah. And he goes, listen, he's gonna have to get out of the race, and now it's gonna be me and you. and let's just commit to each other that we're gonna treat each other fairly, that we're not gonna get down in the mud here, and that whoever wins, wins, but we're gonna be gentlemen about this. And I said, yeah, of course, Jeb, no problem. I'm from New Jersey. You just keep thinking that. That'll be good. So that was the mindset, right? And then all of a sudden it was like, no, he's not getting out. In fact, he's doubling down. Yeah, John McCain's not a hero, and I don't like him. I don't like his wife either, you know? So it became clear to me that those were our two problems: a different standard that Donald was being held to than any of the rest of us, and the fact that the American people at that moment in our history saw having held a public office or holding a public office was a disqualifier for doing what they wanted to have done in Washington, or at least so they thought. And so, you know, it was, that made the race as we went forward even tougher, and there was not a lot that any of us thought we could really do. The last thing I'll say to you is, though, that Donald Trump is a lot of things. Dumb is not one of them. No matter what you want to think about him, positive or negative, you'll notice that I never got a nickname. Right? You know, Low Energy Jeb, Little Marco, Lion Ted, Crazy John, right? They all got nicknames. I never got a nickname. And I know why. He doesn't give nicknames to people who he thinks will come back at him and who he thinks will be a problem. And the example of that today to prove that point is Nancy Pelosi. No nickname for her, right? We're deep into this now. I'm ready to tell you right now, she will not get a nickname. And she won't get a nickname because he's like, she's formidable. Crying Chuck Schumer, he could care less, right? No problem. And, you know, the example, you know, that I give to you to amplify that point is on the night of the last debate before New Hampshire, you may recall that I had a somewhat memorable encounter with Senator Rubio. And I remember after that was over and we went to the first commercial break, you never quite know, like when you're up there in front of 20, 30 million people, you think you know how you're doing, but you're not exactly sure. And you certainly don't know how it's playing on TV because you can't see it. And then you can't talk to your staff during the breaks, that's against the rules, but you can't talk to your family. So I went up to the edge of the stage, and Mary Pat was there with our two youngest children, with Patrick and Bridget. So I got up to the edge of the stage and I kneeled down and I said, "So how'd it go?" And Mary Pat's like, "How did it go?" Oh my God. His career is over. Like, you just ended Marco Rubio's career in front of the entire country. Like, he should just go home, like quietly, just go home. And you should say nothing the rest of the night. Just go up there, and when they come to you, say, "Pass." Because you can't do better than you've done. And I'm like, really? And Patrick, my now 18-year-old son, looked at me and said, "Dad, I mean, that was really tough." Like, he said, "It sounded like you were talking to one of us." So I was taking this in, and then all of a sudden I feel a hand on my shoulder grabbing me. And I turn around, and it's Trump. And I said, "Hey, Donald." And he said to me, "Oh, my God, don't ever, ever get mad at me." He said, poor little Marco." He said, "I thought he was going to pass out and I was going to have to catch him." And he said, and then you leaned on the podium and you looked down at him. He said, "It looked like Perry Mason." And only Donald did that so it would make a Perry Mason analogy, right? And it looked like Perry Mason. He said, and then you hit him again. He said, "That was like the punch Ali didn't give to Liston as he was going down." He said, it was unbelievable. "Don't ever get mad at me." And that's, you know, why no nickname for me, because there's plenty of possibilities. But to this day, still no nickname from the president. Just Chris. That's it.
Governor, I think you are the ripe old age of 56. Mm-hmm. You've been U.S. Attorney from New Jersey, governor of one of the most important states in the country for 2 terms. I think roughly 6 weeks ago, were offered the position of Chief of Staff to the President of the United States, declined. That's probably a whole nother story.
Yes, it is.
But you're young. You think you may make a run for national office again someday?
Well, listen, you never say never, Sure, you're all brave because Mary Pat's not here. She'll see this. No, I think, listen, I would never say never to that. I'm young enough to do it if I wanted to, but I would say to you, John, that at this stage of my life, I would only do it if I saw a pathway to winning. I hate that people get into the race when they know they have no chance to win. And they just take up space and they take up money and it's a vanity exercise and they don't see a pathway to getting there. And I wouldn't never want to be one of those people. And so if I saw a pathway where I thought I could win, then sure I would consider doing it, because I think once you've done it once and you didn't win, and certainly the man whose library we're sitting in, kind of ran in 68, really ran in 76, lost twice, and decided to go back in 1980 one more time against the advice of a lot of people who thought that his time had passed. But he didn't think his time had passed, and he made the sale to the American people the 3rd time. So I would never say never to that, because once you do it once, everything else that happens in the country you see through the prism of, what would I do if it were me? If this situation came up or that situation came up, what would I do if I were there? What would I do differently? What would I do hopefully better? And so when your mind starts thinking that way, it's very difficult to get those thoughts to leave it. And all those thoughts also help you ultimately be a better candidate and if you're to win, a better president, because you've thought through so much of this beforehand that when different problems with just a slightly different gradation to them come up, you're ready. You've thought things through, in your heart what you think is right, and your mind has processed some of it. So I'd never say never to that. I don't, as I sit here right now, I don't see it. But when I walked on this stage in 2011, I couldn't imagine what was happening to me. I was just so happy I had beaten John Corzine and a chance to be governor of my state. The idea of being president, honestly, that day was preposterous to me. Like, I said, no, this is not the way this works. I need more time. I need more experience. I need to get ready. I haven't studied a thing about foreign policy. Like, I can't lead the world's greatest superpower without spending some time studying that and thinking about it and learning about it. That all seems like an incredibly antiquated concept. Right now, right? But at the time, it seemed right on, right? And so, I'm tired, there's the old Yiddish saying, men plan, God laughs. And I try to remind myself of that all the time, that when I walked on this stage that day, the idea that I could have been president of the United States was preposterous to me. When I left it, it was less so. And so who knows where life will lead next. But I'm certainly not ready to give in, and I'm certainly not ready to keep quiet. So the combination of the two will make me dangerous.
Good. Good. You write in the book, you spend months and months and innumerable man hours working with a team to put together the traditional transition plan for President Trump. That got cut short. You write about it in the book. won't go into all the depth on it, but had that not happened, I know this is truly hypothetical, is the job of Attorney General of the United States, would that have been one that you'd say, yep, I'll check that box?
Sure. I told the president, when I endorsed him at the end of February, he asked me, if I win, is there anything you'd be interested in doing? This is February now of 16. And I said, really, the only two jobs I'd be interested in, vice president or attorney general. I don't have an interest in doing anything else. I'm the sitting governor at that time. I'm not looking to collect titles. I got plenty of titles. I don't need to just be sitting at the cabinet table doing something. If it's vice president or attorney general, I'd take either one of those. Beside that, Donald, I'm really not interested. That has not, of course, stopped him from offering me everything but Secretary of Labor, Secretary of Homeland Security twice, Secretary of Labor twice, Secretary of Homeland Security twice, Special Assistant to the President, Ambassador to Rome, Ambassador to the Vatican, and most recently conversations, which you'll read a little bit about in the Wall Street Journal today, much to my chagrin, the White House Chief of Staff, all of which are incredible jobs, not diminishing them at all, but when you get to my stage in your career, you want to do what you want to do. And if you don't feel an imperative to do what he's offering, then give someone else a chance to do it who does feel an imperative to do it. And plus for me, we have 2 children remaining at home. 2 of our children have since graduated from college since I was here the last time. 2 of them are still at home. One's a senior, one's a sophomore. So if I were to go to Washington, they're not coming. And neither is Mary Pat. Right? So I'm going by myself. To justify that to them, forget about my loneliness, which I would write extensively about in my second book, my own journey to loneliness. To miss your children every day and to miss your wife every day, I think you need to be able to look them in the eye and say, this is something I have to do. I have to do this. I can't say no. And I need you to understand. And Attorney General would be one of those jobs because I started in the Department of Justice. I loved my 7 years in the Department of Justice as U.S. Attorney in New Jersey. One of the folks we had lunch with today asked me, did you have a favorite job? And I said, sure, it's U.S. Attorney. Because every day you're doing, if you do the job right, you're doing pure goods without regard to politics of any kind. You're just determining if someone has broken the law and you can prove it beyond a reasonable doubt, then it's your job to make it right and to make justice happen in our country, regardless of someone's standing in society, whether it's high or low or in the middle. And so the idea of, for anybody who's been a U.S. attorney, to return to the Department of Justice building and go to the 5th floor where the Attorney General sits would be something that I would look at my wife and children and say, I have to do this. But absent that, and the vice president's job seems to be fairly ably filled at the moment, I just have told the president, I don't want to leave my family. And, my son's playing his last year of baseball this year. I want to see him play. Those are things that, I won't ever get back. And when I was governor, I missed some of that. Although you all may recall the story of me one day taking my helicopter to my son's baseball game. And, we paid for it, but I couldn't get there if I didn't do that, given the responsibilities I had in Trenton. And it became this big thing, that I'd taken the helicopter there. And we actually landed it on the lacrosse field, which was next to the baseball field. And so then, and I had to leave early from the game. So they started up the helicopter. And my son's baseball coach, it was in a state tournament game, my son's baseball coach was kneeling next to the cage, and the game was going on. And Andrew's a catcher, and he's crouched behind the plate. And his coach yells to him, "Would you tell your father to shut his helicopter off?" And later on, at the year-end banquet, the coach got up there and when he was talking about each kid, when he got to Andrew, he said, "I said something to Andrew that I never ever thought I would wind up saying to any player of mine." in an angry way. Would you tell your father to shut his helicopter off? But that's the way I feel about my kids and my commitment to my family, and I'm willing to make those sacrifices, but not for something where I don't feel like it's the thing that I can uniquely do better than anyone. And I think Attorney General would be one of those jobs.
My last question, I have 37 more, but we don't, we don't have the time. And then I'd like to turn it over to you in the audience. President Trump's greatest success thus far and greatest failing?
Well, I think his greatest long-term success will be what he's done with the judiciary. He has been more effective at placing really good, smart, conservative judges on the bench than any president in my lifetime in this shorter period of time, in 2 years. And he's done that by picking high-quality people, including, Justice Gorsuch and Justice Kavanaugh, but picking high-quality people who had great track records, and he's allowed his White House counsel's office to really focus on that as their main job. And so as a result, we've gotten 99 now, and there's going to be another, I think 24 passed in the next 3 weeks or so. They all got out of committee yesterday or 2 days ago, and there'll be another 24 going through, including on the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, a guy who served as my deputy chief counsel as governor, who's 46 years old and will be an extraordinary Circuit Court of Appeals judge, I suspect, for the next 30 to 40 years. And that's the legacy he's going to leave. Now, there's other things he's done that I really like in deregulation and in tax policy and in trade policy, but if you give me the one longest term legacy he's established so far is his changes to the federal judiciary to balance off what Barack Obama did over the 8 years in putting more liberal judges on the bench, and we see some of the results of that. Look, his biggest failing is that he can't control his impulses, and in every way. And it's okay when you're a real estate developer in New York to act on impulse, right? I mean, all it's going to do is cost you money ultimately if it goes sideways. But in the end, no one's going to really hold it against you over the long term, and the ramifications downstream for other people are minimal, if any. When you act as impulse as the President of the United States, I think at times he doesn't fully appreciate how impactful his words are. And, it's not to say I want him to change, because I don't expect him to. I've known him all these years, and he's not going to change. But it would be nice if every once in a while he would just take a breath before he said some of the things he said, because it sets back his ability to achieve, from a policy perspective, what we want him to achieve. And he had a unique opportunity, I think, in the first 2 years with a Republican Congress to do much more than he did. And he's going to realize that now when he's sitting across from Nancy Pelosi. And it's just not going to be possible to achieve some of the things that he'd want to. I think they'll get some things done, but I don't think they'll get some of the things done on the Republican agenda that we should have gotten done in those first 2 years if he had had an organized transition. And all that stuff goes back to impulse to do something different, an impulse to just say whatever he thinks. It is, and I made a career out of being authentic and just saying what you think, but you have to also control your impulses as an adult leader. That there are times that I would have liked to say a lot of different things about a lot of different people. Believe me. But I didn't, because I knew that the import of my words were greater than the import of the words that I was responding to. Last thing that manifests itself in this is something that I got taught a long time ago about politics, which is don't punch down. Don't punch down. It diminishes you. Somebody's beneath you and they're punching at you. They're hitting your knees and your thighs and your shins. Brush it off. Only punch straight ahead or up. Don't punch down. And I think that's the manifestation of that impulse, is to say, anyone who punches me, I will punch back. Whether it's Judge Curiel in the Trump University case, or whether it's the Khans when they speak at the Democratic National Convention. And I write about all these different instances in there, or whether, it's any of those folks that have come along that poke at him. I understand nobody likes it, but you're in this business. So, decide whether you want your words to consistently have power and authority. And if you do, which you should as president, then only punch straight ahead or punch up. Don't punch down. I had a political science professor in college who said to me, you're going to run for office someday, and I want you to remember something. This is an absolute truism. I said, okay, what is it? Professor Souls, who's since passed away, he said to me, Chris, when your adversary is in the midst of committing suicide, there is no reason to commit murder. The result is the same. And I've said that frequently to the president in our regular conversations. When he's going after somebody who's obviously, spinning their way down the toilet, but just haven't made it down yet. Like, they're going, man, just let them go. You don't have to stab them on the way down. You don't have to. I know you'd like to, but you don't have to, and it diminishes you. And I think that's his biggest weakness.
Well said. Questions from the audience. All we ask is if you have a question, raise your hand. We'll try to get to you in the limited time we have, but make sure we put the mic in your hands so that you can be heard by everyone. So we'll start right here.
Hi, Governor. Welcome to California, I guess the second time at least.
At least.
And while you're waiting around for nothing to do, we'd love to have you come here and be our governor.
Yeah. Thank you. Got a feeling it'll make New Jersey look like a walk in the park, given what's gone on out here.
Could you please give us just some quick comments, maybe some behind-the-scenes look of the Mueller investigation and where we're headed with that?
Well, the great thing about the way Bob Mueller is running this investigation is that I don't have any behind-the-scenes look, because he's not leaking anything. And that's the way it should be. When I was U.S. Attorney, I always used to say the greatest thing about my job was only I know what I know. And that's the way it should be. Because when you're dealing with people's reputations, you should keep your mouth shut until you can prove something beyond a reasonable doubt. And we don't do that often enough in this country when it regards our justice system. Bob Mueller's doing that. You don't hear from Bob Mueller until he brings a charge, and then he's putting himself behind it. I sense he's near the end, but that's only a sense, because it's been almost 2 years, so I think it's about time to get this thing wrapped up. But I told the president this. I told him this in February of 17, when this stuff was really starting to get going. I said, Mr. President, take my word for it. I've been a prosecutor. There is no way you can make this shorter, but there's lots of ways you can make it longer. And the ways you make it longer is to keep opening your mouth and tweeting it's a witch hunt and poking the bear. Because when you poke prosecutors, they say, oh, okay, let's go down this road and see what this looks like. And let's go down that road and see what that looks like. And so I think that I understand the president's frustration. I personally understand it. I got accused of some things and investigated that turned out to be completely baseless. And it really sidetracked my presidential campaign. And very few people remember the fact that, I never got charged in any of that stuff, never even accused of it after 3 different investigations, right? But people just remember something happened with the George Washington Bridge or something, and I don't know exactly what it was, but it was something, right? And he must have done something, I guess. I don't know, right? But I really think that, for us in the Mueller investigation, I know Bob well. I worked with him for 7 years when I was U.S. Attorney. He was director of the FBI. I've always found him to be a man of honesty and integrity, and I think he'll do a credible job here. I won't prejudge the report. I'll read it, and if I have objections to it, I'll say it. Like, for instance, I thought that recently, unless there's something I don't know that hasn't been reported, that the raid on Roger Stone's house was overkill. And I don't think it inures to Bob's benefit or the benefit of the FBI. Now, maybe we're going to hear something later on that will justify that, but I doubt it. And I think that that's overkill. So when I have a problem with him, I'll say I do, but I think so far, in the main, he's been extraordinarily responsible. And I hope that by the end of the quarter, we'll get some report from him so that the country can move on to other things and not be obsessing every day about Bob Mueller.
And over here, Governor.
I'd like to know, how often do you meet with the president currently? And I would really like to see you run for office in 2024. And when you do, I'd be happy to advise you on foreign affairs.
There we go. I never come to the Reagan Library and leave without encouragement. That's good. The president and I usually speak every 7 to 10 days or so. Usually it's over the phone and not in person, although if I'm in Washington, I'll let him know I'm in Washington, and sometimes he says, come over, and we'll chat in person. And I speak frequently to the First Lady as well, because we're old friends. I mean, we've had 15 years of dinners together, just the four of us. Mary Pat and I were at their wedding. We are old friends, and so we speak regularly. And, you know, sometimes the conversations go well and sometimes not so well. You know, sometimes they're great conversations, and other times I'll be telling him something that I think is not going exactly the way it should. And he usually has one of two responses when that happens, if he's in a bad mood. Either he'll say to me, why are you so hard on me? You've been my friend for all these years, and you are harder on me than anyone. Very hard, very unfair. Or if he's in a really bad mood, and I say, don't do that. It's not smart. He'll say to me, let me ask you a question. Didn't I beat you? Didn't we both run, and didn't I win and you lose? Like, yes, sir, that's true. I'd love to talk to you about that sometime. I can walk you through all the different reasons I think that happened. So, and on 2024, like I said before, I would certainly not say no. I just want to see what it looks like, and I want to make sure that, there's a way to win.
Back here.
Good afternoon, Governor.
Sir.
I appreciate your time here, and
My
we
pleasure.
all appreciate your time, and it's
Thank
an
you.
honor for me to be here and ask you these questions. First of all, this has to do with foreign policy. How do you feel about the president's actions in Syria and what he intends on doing? We all want our boys home, but still, we all need that security there. What is your take and your feeling on all that?
Yeah, I would be opposed to pulling troops out of Syria for two reasons. The first is, as much as I love my friend the president, I don't believe ISIS is yet defeated. And I think they've shown in the last 4 or 5 weeks that they're not. And that they've killed some Americans, and they've done some things that shows there's still life in that organization. And I think if we remember back to the presidential campaign in 15 and 16, they were committing terrorist acts on what seemed like almost a weekly or bi-weekly basis. And there was a lot of conversation in the debates about what you would do about ISIS. And so that one reason. The second reason is I think it sends a very poor signal to Iran. I think Iran needs to know that we are not ceding Syria to their sponsor, Russia. And Russia and Iran are allies. And I don't think we want to give Russia, I think Barack Obama's biggest foreign policy mistake beside the Iran deal itself was his actions or inactions in Syria, and essentially ceding that to the Russians. We had spent 40 plus years keeping the old Soviet Union and then Russia out of the Middle East. And then Barack Obama just ushered them right back in. And I don't want Donald Trump to give them a bigger footprint than what they have already. So I think those are the two reasons. You're right. Of course we all want to have our soldiers home. Of course we don't want to have people in harm's way. Of course we're tired of these endless wars. Okay, but what's the alternative? Because what we learned on 9/11 was that if we don't take it to them, they will take it to us. And the idea that America any longer is protected impenetrably by our two oceans is folly. And I lost a lot of friends on 9/11. New Jersey lost more citizens than any state other than the state of New York. Over 950 New Jerseyans were killed on 9/11. And a number of them were from my parish in my hometown. And you don't forget that. I was at a basketball game with my 15-year-old daughter at our local parish, and she goes to a different school, and they were playing that school. And the gym is named after one of the men who was killed on 9/11. So whenever I walk into that gym and I see his name, you know, you can't forget. And I don't think as president we can afford to forget. So I would oppose what he's proposing to do in Syria. And I think what you've seen him do is back off that. He said he was going to do it in 30 days or something, right? And then all of a sudden it was like, well, we're going to have an orderly transition that will help over a period of time. And with Donald Trump, always remember something. Pay much more attention to his actions than his words. What he does is much more important than what he says.
Regrettably, we only have time for one last question, and we'll come right over here. Yes, sir.
Governor, your thoughts on the State of the Union address?
I think he did a good job. I mean, listen, I do. It struck me listening to it that he had two drafts of the speech. One that was more conciliatory and unifying, and one that was more defiant. And that he was probably going back and forth between the two versions, so he decided to give both. Because the speech was an hour and 20 minutes long. It was the longest State of the Union in American history. Think about that. It was the longest state. I mean, I never thought anybody could speak longer than Bill Clinton. But Donald Trump did it. And I thought there were lots of really good things in the speech, and I thought he approached it the right way. And I think he hit it as a kind of a reset button for his presidency. And now what happens with immigration over the next, 6 or 7 days is going to be really important in terms of that. And where we go from here, I think, will be dictated in large measure by what happens there, even more than the speech. But you look at the reaction to the speech across the political spectrum, it is the single most popular thing Donald Trump has ever done as president, with Republicans, independents, and Democrats. He got higher grades from all three of those than on anything he's done as president. So that tells you it's a good speech. And he delivered it well. You could tell he was enjoying himself. That's another reason it went for an hour and 20, because I had the text, and he was riffing off that text, and that poor teleprompter operator was going like, where did this come from? This is not on the text. Then he's off going, man, and that's Donald. But it was good, and I think he did well. And I'd end with this, that people really gave me a hard time when I endorsed him in February of 16. Sometimes Republican voters just amaze me. They really do. I'm a Republican all my life. You'll see in the book that I figured out in 1976 that I was a Republican because my parents said, well, what are you? My mom was a Democrat, my dad was a Republican. So we had a divided household where they were canceling each other's vote out frequently. My mother ultimately came around and became a Republican later in life, but they were both saying to me, what are you, Christopher? You're interested in politics, you're Republican or Democrat? I don't really know. So they said, well, here's a way to figure it out. Watch the Democratic convention from beginning to end, watch the Republican convention from beginning to end, and see who you agree with more. So I did that at 14 years old and watched the entire Democratic convention that nominated Jimmy Carter and Walter Mondale, and the entire Republican convention that wound up nominating Gerald Ford and Bob Dole, and had Ronald Reagan obviously in the middle of that convention fight as well. And when Gerald Ford got done with his speech, I turned to my mother and father and said, I'm a Republican. And my mother desperately said, why? And I said, I don't know, because it seems to me that Republicans believe that we can solve problems, and Democrats believe that government solves problems. That's what I said at 14. But kind of Republican voters drive me nuts, right? So like, when I endorsed Trump in February of 16, the never Trumpers, which there were a lot of inside the party at that time, excoriated me, including the woman who was my national finance chairman for my presidential campaign, Meg Whitman, put out a brutal statement on me, calling me a bunch of different names. And the sad thing is, to this day, Meg and I haven't spoken. It's now, almost 3 years. And we haven't spoken since then. I've tried, but she's not interested, and she's really angry about the Trump thing, apparently. And I took a lot of abuse from Republican voters for it. And I was saying to a group of folks earlier today, I'm practical. After Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina, I'm like, he's the winner. It's over, man. If you come in second by a hair to Ted Cruz in Iowa, you win New Hampshire 2-1, and then you go down and win South Carolina by 12 points, man. It's done. You've hit the Midwest, the Northeast, and the South. Every section of the country, except for the West, has had an opportunity to weigh in on this, and they've weighed in and they've said, we want him. So to me, it was a pretty easy choice. He was my friend. I said, I'm going to go and try to make him better. And the only way to do that is to endorse him and get in there and help him. But I took a lot of abuse from Republican voters. In the same way that in 2012, I took a ton of abuse from Republican voters, even though I passed on the opportunity to run for president. After I announced that, 5 days later, I endorsed Mitt Romney. I was Mitt Romney's #1 surrogate. I gave the keynote address at the convention. I worked my rear end off for Mitt Romney. And then Hurricane Sandy hit. And I had the temerity to shake the hand of the President of the United States when he got off of Air Force One to come to New Jersey to survey the 365,000 homes that we had destroyed in 24 hours. And that became, as you all remember, as good Republicans in here, the Obama hug, right? I hugged Obama. Now, I wish that I had done this and given this to the library beforehand so they could put it up on that screen. There was never a hug. Now, I'm from a Sicilian mother. We know how to hug, okay? We don't give one of those like, hug. We hug, right? If I hug you, you know it. He got off Air Force One. He put out his hand. I shook his hand. And he took his left hand and he patted my right shoulder and said, "Are you doing okay?" And I said, "Not so great." And he said, "I understand. Let's go take a look." And we walked out to Marine One and we left. That became a hanging offense as a Republican. Let me tell you, when I went to Iowa, New Hampshire in 2015 and 16, I heard more about that than I heard about the George Washington Bridge, about taxes in New Jersey, about my tax plan for America's future, than anything. People would get up at town hall meetings and say, "How could you have hugged Obama and given him the election?" And I bring these things up at the end because I want you to remember something. We now have people decrying the division in our country. We have people decrying the anger and the vitriol in our country. I can't go anywhere without people saying to me, our country is so divided, it's so ugly, the Democrats do this, the Republicans do that, we're so upset, we hate the way our country is now. It started then. Because when the governor of a state treats the President of the United States with respect in the midst of a natural disaster, and that is a negative, then that's a problem. And by the way, you all taught, everybody who did that at that time, taught the other Republicans a lesson. And the lesson was, oh, for God's sake, don't even be respectful towards a Democrat. And when I went from 19% to 9% in New Hampshire in the month of January of 2016, and from second place to 6th, it was because of 2 ads. That Jeb Bush spent $3 million on one of them in a month, and Marco Rubio spent $3 million on the other. And let me tell you what those 2 ads were. Ad number 1 from Jeb Bush was the Obama hug. When Mitt Romney needed him most, Chris Christie sided with Barack Obama. Ad number 2 was from Marco Rubio. Nancy Pelosi had come to New Jersey to open, while I was governor, a prisoner reentry facility to help to train people leaving jail with a trade or something to be able to help them be tax-paying citizens when they leave jail rather than being wards of the state. Something that I really favor and think is a smart idea. So Nancy Pelosi and I are at this event together, sitting next to each other. And we have an African-American minister named Pastor Joe Carter from Whitney Houston's church in Newark, New Jersey, and he's going to give the invocation. So he says, in our country today, we need love. We need to love each other. So I want you, as we say our prayer today, to hold the hand of the person next to you. So Pelosi and I look at each other, and she says to me, I don't know. I don't know if this hurts me or you more. And I said, well, I guess we're about to find out. And she said, yeah, because we don't want to look like we're not holding hands then, right? Because the pastors ask you to hold hands, and everybody else is holding hands. And there are 18 cameras out there, right? So Pelosi and I hold hands. Marcos Rubio's ad is the picture of me and Pelosi holding hands, cropped out the other people around us. So it's like we're on a date. And it says, the tagline on the ad is, Chris Christie, you can judge him by the company he keeps. And he also sent out mail on that. So like I'd go door to door, Mary Pat would go door to door, and people would go, what about this? Holding hands with Nancy Pelosi, the evil Nancy Pelosi. You know, like, and then so you try to explain it to people. Oh, no. They were at an event together and they were praying and they'd be like, you know, he's the guy who hugged Obama. I remember him. Jeb just told me about that, you know? If we want a country that can be united with each other, not on everything, because country's been designed to be an argument. 3 branches of government co-equal. You know, states having their own rights to do their own things. It's designed to be an argument. But if we really want to be a united country on the things that matter, we better stop penalizing people for being civil to the other side. Because if you deplore incivility, then don't penalize civility. And listen, the title of the book, by the way, I added all those names in the subtitle. That was the publisher's idea, because apparently in the age of Amazon, if you search any one of those names, my book will come up. And so that's why all those, it was not my idea, but I gave in to the publisher on that one. But the part that was my idea was the power of in-your-face politics. I am happy to have confrontational politics with constituents, with adversaries, with allies. But there has to be a strain of civility to all of it so that afterwards we can go out for a drink, we can go out for a dinner, and we can trust each other that when we make a deal, we'll keep a deal. Right now, nobody in Washington believes that if they shake hands with each other, they'll keep the deal. Because they don't know each other, because they haven't been civil to each other, because if they're seen out for dinner together, they're going to get some mail piece that says you're judged by the company you keep. let alone if you actually have the temerity to pray together for the country's future and to hold each other's hands when you do. So this is an educated, concerned, involved audience. And so I want to say to all of you as leaders, because that's what you are, to your neighbors, your friends, your family members, you're here on a Saturday afternoon, you care about this country and its future and its politics, and you are known to care about it to your family and your friends and others. We need to set a new example. We need to be able to say to each other, it's okay that I'm friends with Cory Booker. I don't agree with Cory Booker on almost anything. Some of his stuff drives me loony. And I look at him and say, what are you talking about, man? You're a smart guy. But you know what? He's a good man. He's not a bad person. He's wrong. Like desperately, horribly wrong about a lot of things, but he's not a bad person. I've known him for 15 years. And I just read a report, and the reason I brought him up was that he was in Iowa making his pitch now for president, and he said at an Iowa town hall, I'm proud of the fact that in 8 years that he was governor, I worked with Chris Christie, and we got a lot of things done together that made our state a better place because we were willing to compromise with each other. And the reaction from the audience was to boo. They booed him because in a liberal Democratic audience in Iowa, bringing up my name is unacceptable. That shouldn't be. You can plenty disagree with me too. I mean, you know, the only person I agree with all the time is me. All right? So we all disagree with everybody except for ourselves. So I just want to end with that, and I went over time, but I think it's important as we get into a new presidential election cycle. I don't know that we're going to be able to work this part of it out this time around, because I think the anger on both sides is pretty deep-seated, and I think we maybe need to have a catharsis on all that. But I want you to think about it, because those things that happened to me as somebody who could never be seen as soft on anything, yet all of a sudden, because I shake Barack Obama's hand and I hold Nancy Pelosi's hand during a prayer, all of a sudden I'm like some squish moderate who doesn't deserve to be supported by Republicans. That's nuts. It's crazy, but it happened. This isn't speculation, it happened. And if it happens to me, it'll happen to anybody. So I love the fact that our country is an argument. But as part of that argument, we need to be civil to each other during it. There shouldn't be a penalty for that. Never forget what Adam said. And that's why I leave it with your responsibility. And I promise that I will end this now and go and sign books. Adams is my favorite founding father. He is often the forgotten founding father. If it wasn't for David McCullough, he'd be the completely forgotten founding father, right? He's not on Mount Rushmore with Washington and Jefferson, but he should be. Because in my opinion, he's the guy who stood on the floor in Philadelphia day after day after day after day and said, we must declare independence from Great Britain. If we don't, we will never truly be free. And that is what we need to bequeath our children and grandchildren. It was Adams who did that. Jefferson came in and gave it some good detail in the Declaration after it was over, but he wrote it with Adams. Adams said something in his diary, which I will leave you with, because he wrote it for posterity. He wrote in his diary near the end of his life, I am writing this for posterity, meaning he was writing it for us right here today. He said this, you shall never know the sacrifices that were made to secure for you your liberty. I pray you will make a good use of it. For if you do not, I shall repent in heaven for ever having made the sacrifice at all. John Adams understood that liberty and the civil society that comes from liberty is a gift that they bequeath to us, and each generation has bequeathed down to us now. I try to judge everything I do in public life after having read that quote years ago by answering that question. And what I'm doing, will that make Adams repent in heaven for ever having made the sacrifice to give me this chance? And if we can answer that in a way that's positive, then we're being true to the men and women who formed this country and created the greatest democracy, the greatest free enterprise system, and the greatest society that the world's ever known. And to be a part of that for any part of my life is an enormous gift, as is being here today with all of you. So thanks for having me. I appreciate it.